The sound of my 6-year-old daughter Emma's silent screams still haunts me. Not because I could hear them, but because I couldn't. She was deaf, communicating only through sign language. And Karen had just locked her inside the community center's industrial freezer. I watched through the small window as Emma's tiny fists pounded against the steel door, her face already turning blue from the sub-zero temperature. What Karen didn't know was that in exactly 3 minutes, a helicopter full of Navy SEALs would land in our subdivision parking lot, and her life would change forever. Before I share what happened next, I wonder if you've ever witnessed discrimination against children with disabilities. Have you seen how some people treat differences as defects? Drop a comment below about where you're watching from. I'd love to know if HOA horror stories are universal or if we just got particularly unlucky in our neighborhood. My name is Michael Torres, and until that horrific Saturday morning, I thought I'd found the perfect balance between my two lives. To our neighbors in Meadowbrook Heights, a pristine suburban community 20 miles outside San Diego, I was simply Mike, the quiet IT consultant who worked from home, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and spent weekends teaching my deaf daughter Emma to ride her specially adapted bicycle with flashing lights instead of a bell. They saw a single father doing his best, maybe struggling a bit financially, definitely keeping to himself more than was considered neighborly in our gossipy subdivision. What they didn't know, what I'd spent years ensuring they'd never discover, was that my IT consulting was actually coordinating counterterrorism operations for SEAL Team 6. As a naval intelligence commander, the modest Honda in my driveway was a deliberate choice, masking the classified work I did from a basement office that looked like any other home workspace but contained encryption equipment that would make the NSA jealous. I'd just returned from a 3-month deployment protecting disabled children in Syrian refugee camps. A mission that hit close to home for obvious reasons. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd traveled halfway around the world to protect vulnerable children from warfare, only to find the real battle waiting in my own manicured neighborhood. Emma was my entire world, the sun around which everything else orbited. Born profoundly deaf due to a rare genetic condition called Waardenburg syndrome, she'd never heard my voice or her mother's lullabies before Nicole passed away from complications during Emma's birth. But Emma's disability had never dimmed her brilliant spirit. If anything, it had made her more perceptive, more expressive, more vibrantly alive than most people who took their senses for granted. She communicated through American Sign Language with a vocabulary that amazed her teachers and medical team. At 6 years old, she could sign complex conversations about everything from why butterflies had patterns on their wings to whether dogs dreamed in smells instead of pictures. Every morning began the same way. Emma would pad into my room on silent feet and gently tap my shoulder until I opened my eyes. Then she'd sign, "Good morning, Daddy," with such enthusiasm that her whole body would wiggle with joy. Her expressive brown eyes, the same shade as her mother's placed in, could convey more emotion in a glance than most adults managed with entire speeches. We developed our own private signals beyond standard ASL. A wiggle of her nose meant she was plotting mischief. A specific hand flutter warned me she was about to ask for ice cream before dinner. And touching her heart twice meant she loved me more than all the stars she could see from her bedroom window. Her cochlear implants helped somewhat, though she often chose not to wear them, preferring the quiet world we'd built together. In that silence, we'd created something beautiful, a home where communication happened through touch, expression, and an understanding that transcended words. Our house was equipped with visual alerts for everything from the doorbell to smoke detectors, and Emma's service dog, Scout, a golden retriever with the patience of a saint and the protective instincts of a Secret Service agent, helped bridge the gap between Emma's silent world and the noisy one around us. The Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association had been under Karen Weinstein's iron grip for 7 years. Though it felt like decades to those of us under her thumb, she lived in the largest house on Magnolia Drive, a sprawling 6,000-square-foot Tudor mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from a European fairy tale, complete with turrets and leaded glass windows that she used to spy on the neighborhood. Her perfectly manicured grounds featured a fountain imported from Italy, topiary bushes trimmed into geometric precision, and a lawn so green and uniform it looked spray-painted. She used this monument to suburban excess as her personal headquarters for what she called community standards enforcement, but what everyone else recognized as a reign of terror disguised in HOA bylaws. At 52, Karen maintained an appearance that spoke of expensive maintenance rather than natural beauty. Her blonde hair never showed roots, styled in a helmet-like bob that didn't move even in San Diego's ocean breezes. She wore designer clothes that cost more than most people's mortgage payments, always in shades of beige, cream, or navy colors. She'd tried unsuccessfully to mandate for all residents' front doors. Her smile never reached her calculating blue eyes, which constantly scanned for violations like a Terminator searching for targets. Behind that polished facade lurked a woman whose bitterness had calcified into cruelty. I'd done my research on Karen Weinstein. It's what intelligence officers do. Her story might have been tragic if she hadn't turned her pain into a weapon against others. Married at 23 to a prominent plastic surgeon, she'd spent 15 years trying desperately to have children. 7 rounds of IVF, 3 miscarriages, 2 failed adoptions when birth mothers changed their minds, and finally a husband who left her for his pregnant 26-year-old nurse. The divorce had been brutal and public, splashed across local society pages. Karen emerged with the house, a massive settlement, and a pathological hatred for families she believed didn't deserve what she'd been denied. In her twisted logic, if she couldn't have children, she'd control everyone else's. Karen's harassment began exactly 3 weeks after Emma and I moved in. Though I hadn't recognized it as harassment at first, she'd appeared at our door with a fruit basket and a smile that looked practiced in a mirror, welcoming us to the neighborhood. Emma had been in the front yard with Scout, practicing her signs for different flowers. Karen's expression had shifted the moment she realized Emma was deaf, her false warmth curdling into something calculating and cold. "Oh," she'd said, that single syllable, dripping with judgment. "I didn't realize you had a special needs child. Will she be attending the local school?" The way she emphasized special needs made it sound like a contagious disease. I'd explained that Emma attended Sunshine Elementary, which had an excellent deaf education program, and that she was thriving there. Karen's smile had tightened into something resembling a grimace. "How wonderful," she'd replied, though her tone suggested it was anything but. "I do hope she'll be able to integrate with the other children in the neighborhood. We pride ourselves on maintaining certain standards here in Meadowbrook Heights." That should have been my first warning. But I'd been optimistic, hoping we'd finally found a place to call home after years of temporary housing due to my deployments. How wrong I'd been. The first citation arrived a week later, tucked under my windshield wiper like a parking ticket. Emma's colorful chalk art on our driveway, a rainbow with smiling clouds that she'd spent hours creating, apparently violated Section 3. R. 5 of the HOA bylaws regarding temporary exterior decorations. The fine was $200. I'd paid it, thinking it was a misunderstanding, and helped Emma wash away her masterpiece while she signed confused questions about why the pretty pictures had to go. The second citation came 3 days later. Scout's presence in our front yard during his bathroom breaks violated Section 4. E. 2. Regarding animals creating disturbances. This despite Scout being a certified service dog with documentation I'd already provided to the HOA. The fine was $300. I'd paid that too, starting to sense a pattern, but still hoping to avoid conflict. By the end of our first month, I'd accumulated over $2,000 in fines for infractions ranging from Emma's adaptive bike having non-standard reflective equipment, the extra lights that helped her see cars since she couldn't hear them, to our mailbox being half an inch too tall. It wasn't, I measured. Each citation came with escalating fines and increasingly threatening language about failure to maintain community standards and consideration for property values. But the real campaign began when Karen discovered I'd installed visual smoke alarms in our home. She'd seen the strobe lights through our windows during a test and declared them a nuisance to neighbors that could trigger seizures, despite no neighbors reporting any issues. When I explained they were necessary for Emma's safety since she couldn't hear traditional alarms, Karen's response had been chilling. "Perhaps," she'd said during an HOA board meeting I'd been summoned to attend. Families with such extensive special requirements should consider communities better equipped for their needs. Meadowbrook Heights has certain expectations that all residents must meet. The board, consisting of Karen's hand-picked allies, a retired dentist who nodded along to everything she said, a real estate agent who feared property values above all else, and Karen's personal trainer who owed her money, had unanimously agreed that visual alarms required special approval that would take months to obtain. In the meantime, I was fined $500 for unauthorized safety modifications. I'd started fighting back then, researching fair housing laws and HOA requirements, but Karen was clever, never quite crossing the legal line into explicit discrimination. Every harassment was couched in HOA bylaws. Every targeting of Emma disguised as concern for community welfare. She began showing up at Emma's bus stop, taking photos and videos, claiming she was documenting traffic pattern disruptions caused by the special education bus that picked Emma up. Emma, sweet and innocent, had tried to make friends with Karen at first. She'd wave enthusiastically whenever she saw her, even drawing pictures of flowers to give to the fancy lady next door. Karen would accept them with a rigid smile. Then I'd find them in her garbage can later that evening. After a while, Emma stopped trying, and I noticed her becoming anxious whenever she saw Karen's car. The situation escalated when Karen banned Scout from the community dog park, citing aggressive behavior that had never occurred. Scout, who was trained to remain calm in war zones, wouldn't hurt a butterfly. But Karen had witnesses, neighbors who depended on her approval for their own HOA violations to be overlooked, who swore they'd seen Scout menacing other dogs. When I presented his certification and temperament testing results, Karen simply changed the rules to require additional insurance for service animals, pricing us out of access. Then came the pool incident. Emma loved swimming, in the water. Her deafness didn't matter, and she could play with other children without the communication barriers she faced on land. But Karen instituted a new rule requiring constant parental supervision for any child with special circumstances, effectively banning Emma from swimming with her friends during the community's children-only swim hours. When I protested, she produced liability studies and insurance documents that her lawyer husband from her failed marriage had helped her craft before their divorce. The morning everything exploded had started so peacefully, it felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke. Saturday, October 15th, dawned clear and mild. One of those perfect San Diego days that made people pay ridiculous housing prices to live here. Emma and I had plans to visit the zoo later. She loved watching the gorillas use sign language with their trainers. It gave her hope that maybe one day everyone would understand her, the way those magnificent apes understood each other across the barriers of species. I was in the kitchen making Emma's favorite breakfast, pancakes shaped like butterflies, with blueberry wings and a banana body, when Scout's low growl alerted me to someone approaching. Through the window, I saw Karen marching up our driveway with the determined stride of someone about to ruin your day. She wore her HOA president uniform, a crisp white blouse that looked like it could stand up on its own from starch, a navy blazer with a small HOA pin that she treated like a sheriff's badge, and a pencil skirt that restricted her movements to tiny, aggressive steps. Her hair was freshly styled, and she clutched a manila folder thick with what I assumed were more citations. Emma was in the backyard practicing her signs with Scout. Running through the new words she'd learned that week, I watched her sign butterfly with such enthusiasm that Scout wagged his tail, probably thinking she was indicating playtime. The sight of her joy made my chest tight with protective anger at what I knew was coming. The pounding on my door wasn't a knock, it was an assault that rattled the frame. Karen never knocked politely. She announced her presence like a battering ram. I took a deep breath, centering myself the way I did before operations, and opened the door. "Mr. Torres," she began without preamble, not even pretending at courtesy anymore. "This has gone on long enough. Your daughter's condition is becoming a liability to this entire community." I kept my expression neutral, a skill honed through years of military service. "Good morning to you too, Karen. What seems to be the problem today?" She thrust the folder at me like it was a weapon. The problem is that we've documented over 47 violations in the past month alone. Your daughter's presence is affecting property values. I have signed statements from real estate professionals. She opened the folder, revealing what looked like printed emails and graphs. According to market analysis, homes in neighborhoods with special needs children sell for an average of 15% less than comparable properties. That's discrimination. Karen, I said quietly, though inside I was seething. And those statistics are fabricated garbage. Her laugh was sharp and cruel, the sound of someone who'd forgotten what genuine humor felt like. It's not discrimination when it's based on facts. Mr. Torres, we're running a community here, not a charity. The board has voted unanimously to require Emma's enrollment in a specialized facility outside our district boundaries. I felt my hands clench involuntarily and forced them to relax. Years of training kept my voice level when every instinct screamed to defend my child. Karen, Emma isn't going anywhere. She's a 6-year-old American citizen, living in her own home. You have no authority to force her relocation. And what you're suggesting violates federal law. Federal law doesn't override homeowner agreements. She snapped, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what appeared to be legal documents. You signed a contract when you purchased this home, agreeing to maintain community standards and ensure all household members comply with regulations. She found what she was looking for and held the screen up triumphantly. Section 8. S. 3 clearly states that the board has discretion to address any resident whose presence negatively impacts the community's welfare. I glanced at Scout through the back window. He'd positioned himself between Emma and the house, his training recognizing potential threats, even from inside. The sight of him protecting her while she remained blissfully unaware made my decision for me. That clause, I said slowly, was intended for criminal behavior, not disability, discrimination. You're misinterpreting the bylaws to target a child. Karen's face flushed, but she pressed on. I have expert testimony supporting our position. Dr. Patricia Weinstein, yes. My former sister-in-law, but her credentials are impeccable, has provided professional analysis showing that deaf children often develop behavioral problems that impact neighboring families. They can't hear warnings, can't respond to verbal commands, and create safety hazards for normal children. The use of normal made my jaw clench. Emma has never created a safety hazard. She's actually more careful than most children precisely because she's learned to be visually aware of her surroundings. That's your opinion as her father? Karen dismissed. The community's needs must come first. I'm scheduling an emergency meeting for this afternoon at 2 o'clock. The residents will vote on Emma's continued residence here. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a menacing whisper that she probably thought was intimidating. I suggest you start looking for alternative arrangements. Mr. Torres, because I promise you'll lose this vote. I've made sure of it. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back with a smile that belonged on a snake. Oh, and bring Emma to the meeting. The residents should see exactly what they're voting on. Sometimes visual evidence is more powerful than words. I'm sure you understand that, given your daughter's limitations. After she stalked away, her heels clicking like a countdown to disaster, I found Emma in the backyard. She'd been watching our interaction through the glass door, and her small face was creased with worry. Scout pressed against her leg, providing the comfort he was trained to offer. What did the angry lady want? Emma signed, her movements sharp with anxiety. Is she trying to take Scout away again? I knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in mine. Using our private signals mixed with standard ASL, I told her everything would be okay, that no one would take Scout or make us leave our home. But even as I signed the reassurances, my mind was racing through contingency plans. My commanding officer had been clear about maintaining cover while protecting my family, but I'd never imagined the primary threat would come from within our own neighborhood. The community center stood like a modern fortress at the heart of Meadowbrook Heights, all glass and steel and pretension. Built 5 years ago with funds Karen had personally raised and never let anyone forget. It featured a large conference room that she'd designed to intimidate. The head table sat on a raised platform like a judge's bench, with theater-style seating for residents, arranged in a semicircle that made every meeting feel like a trial. I arrived at 1:45 with Emma, deliberately early, to avoid the crowd gathering. Emma wore her favorite purple dress with silver butterflies embroidered on the skirt. Nicole had bought it before she died. Somehow knowing our daughter would need something special for difficult days. Scout walked beside her in his official service vest, the one with patches indicating his certification and federal protection status that Karen had repeatedly tried to claim was fraudulent. The conference room was already half full when we entered. I recognized most faces, the Johnsons from 2 streets over, who'd always been friendly until Karen started her campaign. The Martinez family, whose son used to play with Emma before his parents, mysteriously decided she was a bad influence. And Dr. Patel, who'd privately told me he disagreed with Karen's tactics but couldn't afford to oppose her publicly because she held his home-based practice permit over his head. Karen had positioned herself at the podium like a general preparing for battle. She'd changed clothes since this morning, now wearing a severe black suit that made her look like she was prosecuting a capital case. Behind her, she'd set up a presentation screen with "Maintaining Meadowbrook Standards, a Community Discussion," displayed in corporate font. Several residents shifted uncomfortably at the sight of Emma. Unable to meet my eyes, by 2 o'clock, 37 residents had packed into the room. Karen had clearly done her recruitment, bringing in people I'd never seen at previous meetings. They sat in a block near the front, their faces set in expressions of predetermined judgment. A few held printed papers that I suspected were talking points Karen had distributed. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session," Karen began, her voice carrying the false concern of a practiced manipulator. "As your HOA president, it's my duty to address issues that affect our community's stability and future. Today, we need to discuss a sensitive but crucial matter, the impact of accommodating residents whose special needs may be incompatible with our community standards." Several people shifted uncomfortably. I saw Maria Chen, whose daughter had mild autism, grip her husband's hand tighter, but she said nothing, knowing Karen's crosshairs could easily shift to her family next. Karen clicked to her first slide, a graph showing property values in various neighborhoods. This data, compiled by regional real estate experts, clearly shows the correlation between special needs residents and decreased home values. Communities that maintain strict standards see appreciation rates 15 to 20% higher than those that make excessive accommodations. I noticed she didn't cite sources or show error bars. In intelligence work, we called this chart magic, making numbers say whatever you wanted through selective presentation. But most residents wouldn't know to look for that. Furthermore, Karen continued, clicking to a slide showing insurance rates. Liability premiums increase substantially when we're required to make modifications for disabilities. Visual alarms, ramps, special signage, these aren't just eyesores. They're financial burdens that every homeowner here ultimately pays for. Emma tugged on my sleeve, signing a question about why everyone looked angry. I signed back that they were talking about grown-up things, trying to shield her from understanding she was being discussed like a problem to be solved rather than a child to be cherished. Karen's presentation grew more inflammatory with each slide. She showed photos of Emma's chalk art, labeled as "property defacement," Scout sitting in our yard captioned as "uncontrolled animal presence," and even a blurry photo of Emma at the playground with a red circle around her like she was a security threat. "This child," Karen said, pointing at Emma with a manicured finger, "requires constant special treatment that disrupts our community's peace. She can't hear car horns, can't respond to verbal warnings, can't participate in normal childhood activities without extensive modifications." Other parents have expressed concern about their children's safety when playing near a child who can't hear danger approaching. That was a lie so blatant, I almost stood up right then. Emma was more careful than any child I'd ever seen, her visual awareness heightened to compensate for her deafness. But Karen wasn't interested in truth. She was building a case. "The scientific evidence is overwhelming," she declared, clicking to a slide filled with medical jargon taken out of context. "Deaf children show higher rates of behavioral problems, learning delays, and social adjustment issues." Dr. Patricia Weinstein, a respected child psychologist, confirms that integrating such children into mainstream communities often results in negative outcomes for all involved. The fact that she was citing her bitter ex-sister-in-law as an expert witness would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. I could see some residents nodding along, fear overriding their better judgment. As your elected president, Karen continued, building to her crescendo, I must prioritize the well-being of the majority. Therefore, I'm recommending immediate action to address this situation before property values suffer further damage or, God forbid, an accident occurs due to this child's inability to function safely in our environment. That's when I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor with enough force to make several people jump. 6 years of silent acceptance, of trying to fit in, of hoping Karen would find another target. It all ended in that moment. Enough, I said, my voice carrying the command authority I'd used in combat zones across 3 continents. Karen, you're not presenting facts. You're weaponizing fear to justify discriminating against a 6-year-old child. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Emma looked up at me with wide eyes, sensing the shift in energy even if she couldn't hear the words. Karen's face flushed, crimson, but her smile remained predatory. Mr. Torres, emotional responses won't change the reality of our situation. Your daughter's presence here is disruptive, potentially dangerous, and frankly unfair to families who moved here expecting a certain standard of living. What's unfair? I replied, stepping into the aisle so everyone could see me clearly. Is using HOA authority to target a child because of a disability she was born with. What's dangerous is creating an environment where difference is treated as deficiency. And what's disruptive is spending community resources on a vendetta against a 6-year-old girl who just wants to ride her bike and play with her dog. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw a few heads nodding. But Karen's supporters remained stone-faced. You can dress this up however you want. I continued. But what you're doing is illegal discrimination. The Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, by-s. These aren't suggestions. They're federal law, and they protect Emma's right to live in her home without harassment. Karen's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Federal law requires reasonable accommodations. Mr. Torres, what you're demanding goes far beyond reasonable. This community wasn't designed for children with such extensive needs. This community, I shot back, was designed for families. All families, not just the ones that meet your approval. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Emma tugged on my sleeve again. More insistently this time, she signed that she needed to use the bathroom. Her movements urgent. I nodded, about to ask for a brief recess, when Karen made the decision that would change everything. Oh, how convenient, she announced to the room. The child suddenly needs special attention. This is exactly what I mean about constant disruptions. She stepped down from the podium, moving toward us with predatory intent. In fact, I think a practical demonstration would help everyone understand exactly what we're dealing with. She reached out and grabbed Emma's wrist before I could react. Her grip tight enough to leave marks. Let's see how well she follows simple instructions without her father translating everything. Emma's eyes went wide with fear and confusion. She tried to pull away, signing frantically with her free hand. But Karen held firm. Emma, Karen said loudly, enunciating as if volume would somehow penetrate deafness. I need you to come with me. Right now. Can you understand me? Can you follow basic directions? Scout immediately went into protection mode, moving between Karen and Emma, while barking warning signals he'd been trained to use. Several residents stood up, unsure whether to intervene or document what was happening. Let go of my daughter, I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous register I hadn't used since Afghanistan. But Karen was beyond reason, drunk on her own power, and the culmination of months of planned harassment. This child needs to learn that the world won't cater to her limitations forever. Sometimes extreme situations require extreme solutions. She began dragging Emma toward the kitchen area attached to the conference room, ignoring my daughter's silent tears and increasingly frantic signing. That's when I saw where she was heading. the industrial freezer used for storing food for large community events. "Karen, stop!" I roared, moving to intercept her. But two of her supporters actually stepped in my way. Whether from misguided loyalty or shock at the sudden escalation, I'll never know. Time seemed to slow as I watched Karen yank open the massive freezer door. The interior was clearly visible, a steel-walled chamber kept at sub-zero temperatures. With hanging meat hooks and shelves of frozen goods, Emma realized what was happening and began fighting in earnest. Her small fists beating against Karen's arm. But an adult's strength against a 6-year-old's resistance was no contest. Perhaps a few minutes of real-world consequences will teach this child to appreciate the accommodations she receives, Karen announced to the stunned audience. When she can't see her hand signals in the dark and can't hear anyone coming to help, maybe she'll understand why some children simply don't belong in normal society. With a violent shove, she pushed Emma into the freezer. My daughter stumbled, falling to her knees on the frozen floor, then immediately scrambled back toward the door. But Karen slammed it shut with vicious finality, the magnetic seal engaging with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Through the small observation window, I could see Emma pounding on the door with her tiny fists, her breath already forming clouds in the frigid air. The temperature readout on the exterior showed -10 degrees Fahrenheit. The room erupted in chaos. Several people were on their feet shouting, others had phones out recording. And someone was screaming about calling 911, but all I could focus on was my daughter's face through that small window, her lips already starting to turn blue as hypothermia began its deadly work. I lunged toward the freezer, but Karen positioned herself in front of it like a guardian of her own cruelty. "Don't you dare undermine this lesson," she hissed. "A few minutes won't kill her, but it might teach her, and you, about consequences." That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Commander Sarah Mitchell, my direct supervisor at Naval Special Warfare Command. In my panic over Emma, I'd completely forgotten about our scheduled debrief regarding the Syrian operation. The timing seemed surreal, my daughter dying in a freezer while my military obligations called. I answered without taking my eyes off Emma, whose movements were already beginning to slow. "Torres here. Commander Torres. We need immediate clarification on your current operational status." Mitchell's voice crackled through the speaker with unusual urgency. "Intelligence indicates potential threats to your cover identity. We're conducting an emergency security assessment of your residential situation." The background noise was unmistakable, rotor wash from a helicopter. They weren't calling from base, they were airborne. "Ma'am, I'm dealing with a critical family emergency," I said, my voice strained as I watched Emma's signing become sluggish. "My 6-year-old daughter is locked in an industrial freezer by a hostile civilian. She's deaf, hypothermic, and in immediate mortal danger." The line went silent for exactly 2 heartbeats. When Mitchell spoke again, her voice had shifted from administrative to operational OPSIST. "Say again." "Commander, did you just report that a civilian has imprisoned your minor child in a freezer?" "Affirmative," I confirmed, still calculating how to break down the door without crushing Emma behind it. "Local HOA President Karen Weinstein has locked my daughter Emma in a commercial freezer unit as punishment for her disability. Internal temperature -10 Fahrenheit. Emma's been inside approximately 90 seconds. I heard Mitchell relay orders to someone, her voice sharp with command authority. Then she was back. "Commander Torres, be advised, we are currently inbound to your location for scheduled security debrief. Estimated arrival time is 90 seconds. Repeat, 90 seconds. Federal intervention, authorized under protection of military dependents. Secure your daughter's safety by any means necessary." The realization hit like a lightning bolt. The security assessment wasn't routine. They detected something that required an in-person visit, and now they were about to arrive in the middle of Karen's attempted murder of my child. Understood? "Ma'am, be advised. Approximately 40 civilians present. Situation volatile. Copy that. Rules of engagement are defensive only, unless life is in immediate danger. We're tracking your phone GPS. Prepare for immediate extraction of your daughter upon arrival. I ended the call and turned back to Karen, who was still blocking the freezer like a demented guardian. Behind her, through that terrible window, I could see Emma had stopped pounding on the door. She was curled into a ball, trying to preserve heat. Her purple dress, a splash of color against the frosted steel floor. "Karen," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You have approximately 60 seconds to open that door before you face federal charges for attempted murder of a military dependent." She actually laughed, the sound brittle and unhinged. "Military dependent, please? You fix computers from your basement. Don't try to intimidate me with fantasy credentials." "Ma'am?" Maria Chen suddenly spoke up from the back, her voice shaking. "That child is turning blue. This has gone too far. Open the door." "Shut up," Karen whirled on her. "You have an autistic kid. You'll be next if you don't fall in line. This is about protecting our property values, our way of life." That's when the sound started, distant at first, like thunder rolling in from the ocean. But it grew rapidly. The distinctive whoop-whoop-whoop of military rotors that anyone who'd lived near a base would recognize. The windows began to vibrate, pictures rattling on the walls. Karen's expression shifted from smug triumph to confusion. "What is that noise?" Through the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows, everyone could see it approaching, a Black Hawk helicopter in full tactical configuration, door gunners visible, coming in fast and low over our pristine suburban landscape. It wasn't slowing down for a scenic tour. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "Is that military?" The helicopter flared dramatically over the community center parking lot, its rotor wash sending decorative plants flying and setting off car alarms throughout the complex. Before it even touched down, the side doors slid open, and 6 figures in full combat gear fast roped down, their boots hitting pavement in perfect synchronization. Navy SEALs, the most elite warriors in the world, trained to operate in any environment, from Arctic waters to desert compounds. And now they were sprinting across our HOA's carefully maintained landscaping with weapons at the ready. The lead operator reached the building's main entrance in seconds, his team flowing around him like water finding its path. Through the glass doors, we could hear his amplified voice. "Federal agents, this is Lieutenant Commander Jackson, Naval Special Warfare Command. We have reports of an ongoing assault against a military dependent. All civilians remain in place." Karen's face had gone paper white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Behind her, Emma wasn't moving at all now, just a small purple bundle on the freezer floor. The main doors burst open with professional violence, SEALs pouring in with weapons raised but disciplined, each covering their sector with practiced precision. They moved through the building like death incarnate, boots thundering on the polished floors. That's when I made my choice. No more hiding. No more pretending to be just another suburban dad. I pulled out my military ID and held it high. "I am Commander Michael Torres, Naval Intelligence. ID number 47291. My daughter Emma Torres is currently imprisoned in that freezer by this civilian. She's been inside approximately 4 minutes and is showing signs of severe hypothermia." Every head in the room swiveled toward me. The shock on their faces would have been comical if my daughter wasn't dying 10 feet away. Lieutenant Commander Jackson's voice crackled through the lead SEAL's radio. "Commander Torres, this is Jackson. Confirm your daughter's location and status. Industrial freezer, kitchen area, northeast corner of the room. 6-year-old female, purple dress, deaf, suffering from hypothermia. The woman in the navy suit is Karen Weinstein, the perpetrator." The SEALs moved like a force of nature. 2 operators immediately went to the freezer, while Jackson himself approached Karen with his rifle raised. "Ma'am, step away from the appliance immediately." Karen stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on nothing but her own fear. "This is a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president. I have authority here." "Ma'am, you have 5 seconds to comply before I physically remove you," Jackson stated with Arctic calm. One of the SEALs had the freezer open before Karen could form another protest. He emerged carrying Emma's limp form, her skin pale with a blue tinge that made my heart stop. Medic, another operator, cross-trained as a combat medic, was already moving. They wrapped Emma in thermal blankets from their kit, checking vitals with practiced efficiency. Scout had broken free from where I'd dropped his leash. Positioning himself next to Emma and whimpering softly, I dropped to my knees beside them as the medic worked. Emma's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Her hands moved weakly, trying to sign, but her fingers were too cold to form the shapes properly. Core temp 89 degrees, the medic reported. Moderate hypothermia, but responsive. She needs immediate evacuation to a medical facility. I signed to Emma that she was safe, that Daddy was here, that the nice soldiers were helping. Her eyes focused on me, and despite everything, she managed to sign back with shaking hands, cold, scared. Where Scout, I guided her hand to Scout's fur, letting her feel his warmth and presence. The medic continued working, administering warming protocols while maintaining constant vital checks. Behind us, I heard Jackson addressing Karen with the same tone he'd use for enemy combatants. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault on a federal dependent, attempted murder of a minor, child endangerment, and violation of civil rights under color of authority." "This is insane," Karen's voice had risen to a shriek. "She's just a deaf kid. I was trying to teach her a lesson about fitting in. You can't arrest me for community management." "Ma'am, you locked a disabled 6-year-old in a commercial freezer," Jackson replied. "That's attempted murder regardless of your motivations. The fact that she's disabled makes it a hate crime. The fact that her father is a naval officer makes it an attack on a military family." 2 SEALs moved to restrain her, producing zip cuffs that they applied with practiced efficiency despite her struggles. The sound of Karen Weinstein, HOA president, suburban dictator, would-be child killer, being arrested by Navy SEALs while sobbing about property values, was perhaps the most surreal moment of my life. "We need immediate medevac," the medic announced. "She's stable but requires hospital observation for potential complications." Jackson was already on his radio. "Command, this is Jackson. Requesting immediate medical evacuation for 1 pediatric patient. Moderate hypothermia. Landing zone is secure." Through the windows, I could see neighbors gathering outside, drawn by the helicopter and commotion. Some were filming, others just staring in shock at the sight of America's elite warriors in their pristine community center. I turned to address the room, still kneeling beside Emma, but making sure my voice carried. For 7 years, this woman has terrorized families who didn't meet her standards. Today, she tried to murder my daughter for the crime of being deaf. Every one of you who sat silent while she built toward this moment shares responsibility. Maria Chen was crying openly. Dr. Patel had his head in his hands. The Johnsons looked like they'd aged a decade in the past 10 minutes. I tried to fit in. I continued. I tried to be reasonable. I paid thousands in bogus fines, accepted harassment, watched my daughter lose friends because their parents feared Karen's retaliation. And where did that compliance lead? To Emma freezing in a metal box while you all watched? The medevac helicopter was approaching, its medical configuration visible even from inside. Emma was loaded onto a proper stretcher now. EVAS started. Professional monitoring equipment attached. She was signing weekly to Scout, who the SEALs had wisely allowed to accompany her as we prepared to move to the helicopter. I had one more thing to say. This community has a choice. You can continue living in fear of the next Karen, the next tyrant with a clipboard and delusions of authority, or you can remember this moment and choose differently. The transfer to the helicopter was swift and professional. As we lifted off, I looked down at Meadowbrook Heights, its perfect lawns, coordinated mailboxes, and matching driveways. From above, it looked like a model train set, artificial and lifeless. Somewhere down there, Karen Weinstein was being loaded into a federal transport vehicle, about to face consequences she'd never imagined when she woke up that morning planning to destroy a child. Emma's recovery at Naval Medical Center San Diego was remarkable. Within hours, her core temperature had normalized, and she was signing animated stories to the nurses about riding in a helicopter with soldiers. The staff, many of whom had children of their own, went above and beyond to make her comfortable, learning basic signs and bringing art supplies so she could draw pictures of her adventure. By that evening, the story had exploded across media channels. HOA President locks deaf child in freezer, arrested by Navy SEALs, became the headline that launched 1,000 think pieces about discrimination, power, and suburban tyranny. Videos taken by residents showed the key moments: Karen dragging Emma, the freezer door slamming, the SEALs bursting in, and her arrest. The contrast between Emma's innocent vulnerability and Karen's calculated cruelty created a perfect storm of public outrage. The federal charges came down like an avalanche. 17 separate counts including attempted murder, hate crimes, civil rights violations, false imprisonment, and assault on a military dependent. Each carried potential decades in prison. The Department of Justice, perhaps sensing the public attention, assigned their best prosecutors and made it clear they would seek maximum penalties. Karen's defense team tried everything. They claimed temporary insanity brought on by HOA, stress. They argued Emma wasn't really in danger because adults were present. They even suggested I'd orchestrated the whole thing to avoid HOA fines. Each argument collapsed under the weight of video evidence and witness testimony. The trial was swift and decisive. Emma testified via closed-circuit television from a child-friendly room at the courthouse. She signed her story simply and honestly. The angry lady didn't like that she couldn't hear. So she put her in the cold, dark place where she couldn't breathe and thought she was going to die. When asked if she was afraid, Emma signed, "Yes, but Daddy and Scout and the soldier friends saved me. I'm okay now." The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes. Guilty on all charges. During sentencing, Judge Patricia Morrison, herself, the mother of a child with cerebral palsy, delivered a scathing condemnation that would be quoted in law schools for years to come. "Miss Weinstein," the judge said, her voice carrying controlled fury, "you weaponized your authority against the most vulnerable members of society. You transformed what should have been a supportive community into a hunting ground for your prejudices. The court has rarely seen such calculated cruelty directed at a child. You are sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Karen collapsed at the defense table, finally understanding that her reign of terror had led to the ultimate consequence. As they led her away, Emma did something that stunned everyone present. She stood up and signed a message that her interpreter delivered in a shaking voice. Emma says, "I forgive you because hate makes hearts sick. I hope you learn that different doesn't mean bad. Maybe someday you'll understand that deaf kids are just kids who hear with their eyes and speak with their hands." The courtroom was silent, except for muffled sobs. Karen turned to look at Emma one last time, tears streaming down her face, perhaps finally seeing the humanity in the child she'd tried to destroy. The aftermath transformed Meadowbrook Heights completely. The HOA dissolved within a week, replaced by the Meadowbrook Inclusion Association with a charter specifically protecting families with special needs. Property values, contrary to Karen's predictions, actually increased as families with disabled children sought out the newly welcoming community. Emma became an inadvertent celebrity and handled it with grace beyond her years. She used the attention to educate people about deafness, teaching sign language to classmates, and explaining that being different wasn't scary or sad. It was just another way of experiencing the world. The Emma Torres Foundation, funded by the massive legal settlement from the HOA's insurance, began building inclusive playgrounds and funding sign language programs across Southern California. Emma insisted on personally testing every playground, ensuring they were fun for all kids, regardless of ability. Lieutenant Commander Jackson and his team stayed in touch, becoming honorary uncles who attended Emma's school plays and taught her tactical hand signals that she incorporated into her sign vocabulary. Their presence reminded everyone that strength should protect innocence, not threaten it. Congress passed the Emma Torres Protection Act 6 months later, making it a federal crime to discriminate against disabled children in housing associations. The law closed loopholes that had allowed HOAs to become weapons against vulnerable families. Karen began serving her sentence at Federal Correctional Institution Dublin. Initially resistant to rehabilitation, she slowly began participating in programs. After 3 years, she requested permission to write to Emma. That letter, water-stained with tears, contained a single line. "You taught me to see? I'm sorry I was blind for so long." Emma, now 9 and wise beyond her years, chose to write back. Their correspondence became a powerful testament to forgiveness and redemption. Karen learned sign language in prison and began teaching it to other inmates, finally using her organizational skills for good instead of evil. The community center's freezer was removed and replaced with a memorial garden. Emma planted the first tree, a purple flowering jacaranda that bloomed every spring. A plaque beside it read, "In honor of all children who face discrimination, may this garden remind us that our differences make us beautiful, not broken." By the time Emma entered middle school, Meadowbrook Heights had become a model-inclusive community. The annual Emma Torres Day featured sign language performances, disability awareness workshops, and a festival celebrating the beauty of human diversity. Property values reached record highs, as families specifically sought out the neighborhood known for protecting and cherishing all children. Scout lived to the remarkable age of 14, passing peacefully in his sleep while curled beside Emma's bed. His successor, a golden retriever named Justice, carried on his legacy. Emma trained Justice herself, teaching him not just standard service commands, but the special military signals her SEAL uncles had shown her. As I write this, Emma is preparing for Stanford University, where she'll study special education law. Her application essay about the day she was locked in a freezer moved admissions officers to tears. She received full scholarship offers from every school she applied to, but chose Stanford for their innovative deaf education program. The girl who was nearly murdered for being different now stands poised to change how America treats disabled children. She still signs "Good morning, Daddy" every day, still draws purple butterflies when she's thinking, and still believes that love is stronger than hate. Sometimes the darkest moments forge the strongest spirits. Emma emerged from that freezer not broken, but transformed into a beacon of hope for every child who's ever been told they don't belong. Her story reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes or carry weapons. Sometimes they're 6-year-old girls who speak with their hands and hear with their hearts, teaching the world that different isn't less than, it's simply human. And somewhere in a federal prison, a woman who once tried to destroy beauty she couldn't understand is slowly learning to create it, one sign at a time,